If you struggle with migraines, could the nightshade plants that you're eating be triggering those migraines? And considering how many different foods we eat, how would you even know if that was the case? And should you just be avoiding nightshade plants entirely? These are all good questions, and I'm going to try and answer those questions in this video. Hi, my name's Robin, and I used to struggle with terrible, debilitating migraines, but no more. And in this channel, I will be sharing with you how I did that and what I've been learning. Now, on the topic of nightshades, I have a story to tell you that is quite shocking. And when you first listen to this, you might think, well, what has this got to do with migraines? But just hang on for the punchline. You're going to want to hear this one. Before I tell you the story, what are nightshade plants? They are vegetables and plants from the Solanaceae family, and these are the colorful veggies like tomatoes, red peppers, green peppers, chili peppers, and potatoes, and eggplants, and a few others. Now, back to the story. So a few weeks ago, someone comes over to my house to install a solar energy system. His name is Norman. He tells me the story about his daughter that I found so shocking. She was going blind in one eye, otherwise perfectly healthy. And so they went from doctor to doctor to doctor and panicked trying to find out what was going on and what was causing this, and the doctors didn't know. Eventually, they referred her to an eye surgeon who suggested that he was going to do surgery to try and investigate what was happening. The surgery was going to be very, very expensive and, of course, very invasive. And so they weren't very keen to do this, but they didn't know what their other options were. So one day, Norman was driving home and saw a sign for a homeopath. And he thought to himself, well, we've been to all the other doctors. What could it hurt? So they went to the homeopath. And listen to this. It turns out she wasn't going blind in one eye. She was suffering from an ocular migraine. And what he discovered was that what was triggering these ocular migraines were potatoes. She had a food sensitivity to potatoes. So first of all, it's rather shocking that the eye surgeon didn't know that what she was experiencing was a migraine. Because remember, for many people who struggle with migraine with aura, you'll always have some kind of symptom prior to the migraine. In my case, I would get a little blind spot that would gradually grow, and it would have a kaleidoscope effect, and it would often form a shape of a C. And then after about 20 minutes, it would fade, and then the migraine would hit. Now, in her case, the migraine was affecting the nerve going to the eye. So instead of just having a little blind spot that gradually grew, she actually went blind in one eye, which must be absolutely frightening. And so I can understand their concern and the fright. But it's actually a different type of migraine that she was struggling with. And can you believe it? She was almost going to go for surgery to cut open her eye to try and find the problem, when it turned out it was what she was eating. Potatoes. Regular white potatoes. When she cut out the potatoes, problem disappeared. No more blindness, no more ocular migraines. She did this for 4 years. No problem. No more migraines, no more blindness in the eye for 4 years. Eventually, she thought to herself, oh, I'm sure I'm over this. I'm sure I'm healed. I'm sure I haven't had this problem for 4 years. So she had some white potato with her dinner that night. And before you know it, the blindness came back in the eye. The migraine was back. So, needless to say, she is not eating any more white potatoes. Potatoes are part of the nightshade family. And what might have been causing the problem here in her case is that nightshades have two things going on that could be causing problems. One is that they have glycoalkaloids, which is kind of like the plant's own natural bug spray. Now, remember that plants cannot run and hide from their predators. And of course, plants don't really want to be eaten. They don't want to be annihilated. So they have developed various defense mechanisms. And one of these are these little chemicals that they've created. And a lot of it is actually in the stems and the leaves. And when the bug comes around and munches on the stems and the leaves, it gets some of these chemicals. And in some cases, like in the nightshade family, these chemicals are incredibly toxic, and it can kill the bug, or it can certainly ward off the bug, depending on the different plants and the different types of toxins. Now, as humans, we're a lot bigger than these little bugs. And so for some people, they can have these glycoalkaloids and not have any effect. But for some people, they are more sensitive to it, and it does affect them. At least the research is still looking into this, and there seems to be evidence that especially those who have arthritis or joint pain and the autoimmune condition rheumatoid arthritis, if they cut out the nightshade plants, they seem to have a reduction in their symptoms, and they seem to point to the glycoalkaloids as one of the issues. The other part of the problem with nightshades are the lectins. Now, you might have already known about certain other types of lectins that are a problem because the grain wheat has gluten in it, and a lot of people struggle with gluten. Gluten is a lectin. Now, nightshades have a lot of these lectins in them, and what happens with lectins is that they affect the gut lining. And now imagine your gut lining. It has all these little finger protrusions called villi, and you need all those little villi to move the food along and to absorb the nutrients correctly. But the lectins come along and they bind to glucose, and they kind of damage these villi. And so some of them get damaged and they get cut down, and you've got less of them. And so you have a smaller surface area to absorb nutrients, which is one problem. And so lectins are often considered anti-nutrient because of the way that they affect your ability to absorb nutrients. But because of the damage caused to the gut, it can also cause breaks and tears in the gut lining, which is a very big problem because now what is inside the gut lining, inside your gut, which is meant to stay there, it's not meant to go inside the body, can now break through the barrier and get into the bloodstream. And this lets all sorts of trouble in there. Proteins that shouldn't go in, and food particles and all sorts that should not be going into your bloodstream. So the immune system comes along to sort out this problem, and it causes major inflammation in the body. And for some people, that can trigger a migraine, or it can trigger other inflammatory issues, particularly autoimmune issues. So you'll have some researchers, scientists, and doctors that will say you should absolutely avoid lectins at all costs. People like Dr. Stephen Gundry, who wrote the book The Plant Paradox, as well as The Longevity Paradox. He says you should absolutely avoid lectins because even if you don't have any direct symptoms in the moment, like in the case of Norman's daughter where she immediately had a symptom, he says that for some people you'll have an immediate symptom, but for others you might not, and it might just be causing long-term damage that can cause problems over a long period of time, and that will affect your long-term health and longevity. But then you have other people that say, no, lectins are no problem at all, you can eat them as much as you like. So it's a confusing world out there when you start to research it and you start to look at all these different opinions. What do you do about this problem? The best thing to do is to become your own medical detective. Your body is always communicating with you. Your body is always telling you what you need to know. The problem is that we often don't listen. We often don't know how to listen. We don't know how to read the signs and symptoms. If only the body could just send us a text message and say, hey, what you ate half an hour ago, don't eat that again. That's a problem. But what it does instead is that the body will send you subtle signs and signals and symptoms. So if you eat a meal and half an hour later, you notice that you're feeling really fatigued. You have a bit of brain fog. You have a bit of a headache. Or maybe an hour or two later, you trigger a migraine. Well, that's when you really need to look at what did you eat? What did you do? Because it might not just be what you ate. It might be something you did or something you exposed yourself to or stress. There could be many factors involved with migraines, of course. But when it comes to food, this is something that's easy to track. Every time you have a symptom, you could go and note it down and note down what did you eat and start looking for patterns. If you do this on a regular basis, I promise you, you are going to notice certain foods that keep coming up that are associated with certain symptoms. Then, the next step is that you can do an elimination diet. Once you suspect that there might be a certain food that is causing a problem for you, cut it out. It might be your favorite food, I know. But you can go for a few weeks without that food, right? You can do that for the sake of your health, for the sake of being a medical detective and discovering, maybe once and for all, what might be triggering your symptoms. Cut out that food and see how you feel. Do you have more energy? Do you have more vitality? Do you have less fatigue, less brain fog, and less migraines? So start cutting out certain foods that you think might be the biggest problem, and do it for as long as you can. Start with a few weeks, do it a month if you can, and see how you feel. And if no difference, switch to a different food. But keep tracking how you feel and what you are eating. Because what might trigger a migraine for one person is not necessarily going to be triggering the migraine for you. It could be a problem, but it might not be. And so you don't want to live your life cutting out every food on the migraine trigger list just because someone else had a histamine reaction or someone else had a potato reaction. That's a miserable way to live your life, to cut out chocolate and orange juice. Well, actually, you shouldn't be having orange juice anyway because it's loaded with sugar. It's just a sugar bomb and it's going to cause other issues. I'll have other videos on that topic. But all these foods that can cause migraines for some people, it might not be a factor for you. You need to find out for yourself. Don't just avoid everything on the list because that's miserable. What you want to do is avoid the things that are generally causing problems for many people. So, of course, like I just mentioned, things that are very sugary and are likely to cause hyperglycemia and high insulin, those are problematic. But it doesn't mean that you avoid them entirely always. You could maybe have a little bit here and there depending on how your metabolism is working. And if you have sorted out all the other inflammatory issues in your body, you need to be your own medical detective and find out what works for you. That is how you take your power back. That is how you avoid situations like facing surgery for something that you don't even know what's causing the problem. Find out what's causing the problem by learning to listen to your body, learning to listen to those signs and symptoms and feedback. And here's a quick tip on how to prepare your food so that you could avoid some of the problems with the alkaloids and the lectins. Now, with tomatoes, the green and the unripe tomatoes usually have more alkaloid content than the ripe ones. So make sure to always eat ripe tomatoes. And then with the lectins, another thing you can do is to always try to peel and de-seed these foods, because more of the lectins are found in the peels and the seeds or the pips. So with tomatoes, you could quickly blanch the tomatoes and then take off the skin and then scoop out the seeds. And you can do the same with the other veggies as well. Char your peppers, take off the skin, and remove the seeds. That way you'll be removing a lot of the lectin content, not all of it, but a lot of it, and perhaps it'll be enough to help. And hey, if you learned something new in this video, please make sure to give it a like and share with anyone you know who might struggle with migraines. And make sure to subscribe so that I can share more videos with you on how to get to the bottom of your migraines.